to technical trouble, be in continuity with the things. Well, he walked along very sadly and came to a very big tree. He was very upset. Roger Skunk was extremely upset, so that is why he had just come to a very big tree. And on the top of the tree, there was a very large, wise old owl. I think very clear. Good. Now just look at the interruption caused by that small girl. Interruption caused by Zoe. There was no requirement from the side of her. She was just highlighting this particular point. Good. So Mr. Owl, Roger Skunk said, all the other little animals run away from me because I smell so bad. So you do. The owl said, very, very bad. What can I do? Roger Skunk said, and he cried very hard. Just look at the beauty of this particular paragraph. Mr. Owl, Roger Skunk said, this particular paragraph is highlighting that Roger Skunk was ever ready to tell the problem to wise owl, to tell his problem to that particular wise owl. Just look at Mr. Owl told the problem by highlighting this particular, these two words, Mr. Owl. Roger Skunk said, all the other little animals run away from me. He told that all the other animals of the forest used to run away from him because he used to smell in a worst way. So you do, the owl said. I had just added, so you do. You have to highlight this particular, these three words. These are highlighting that Roger Skunk was just highlighting that particular point, that Mr. Owl would also be away from him to look at to that particular worst kind of smell. The owl said, very, very bad. What can I do? Now just look at the query of owl here. He was highlighting very, very bad. Extremely bad. Wanted to highlight. Just look at the adverb, that is very, with adjective bad. I think very clear up to this particular point. You are very clear about the parts of speech. What can I do? Roger Skunk said. Roger Skunk had made a query that what could he do? He wanted to make a query that what he could do. And he cried very hard. And he started crying very hard. He was just weeping or crying in a very loud way, because he was extremely upset to look at his plight, to look at his situation, because he wanted to play with other animals and no animals would like to play with that particular owl. The reason behind that was negativity. What was negativity? His bad smell. I think very clear up to this particular point. He had highlighted his problem to that owl, and owl was able to look at this particular point in a very different way. He was highlighting very, very bad. He had given the confirmation that really the smell of that animal, that is Roger Skunk, was worst. I think very clear. He became extremely upset to listen the comment. I think very clear up to this particular point. The comment of, you have to look at Mr. Owl. I think very clear. The wizard, though shouted and sat right up, and the little golden book spilled from the bed. Just look at the meaning of this small paragraph in a very sensitive way. Now, again, that girl was interrupting her father. Father was telling the story, but that girl, who was not a very small that at that particular moment, she used to interrupt in between, which used to irritate her father. Now just look at the interruption caused by the girl. Again, the wizard, Jo shouted. She had started shouting in a very loud way. the wizard, and sat up. The basic purpose of telling the story or narrating the story of father to that girl was that she could be able to take a nap in a nice way. But instead of sleeping, she was in sitting position at that particular moment. And she was acting and reacting in a very different way. And a little golden book spilled from the bed. A little, you must be able to look at this determiner. Little, a little, the little. I think you are very clear so far the meaning of these three words are these three determiners are concerned. So you have to look at a very small book, golden book had fallen from the bed. Very clear, golden book was lying on the bed. So while that girl was just overreacting, that book had fallen from that particular bed. I think very clear so far as this particular paragraph is concerned. These three lines are highlighting that that girl was interrupting her father again. Why? The reason behind that was the base of the each and every story used to be same. And right now, again, she was adding the next part of the story by her own, because she was in the knowledge of that particular point that the next phase of the story would be like that. Very clear to this particular point, note down the meaning of spilled in a very nice way. Now just look at the next. Now, do Daddy is telling the story. Do you want to tell Daddy the story? Just look at the beauty of this sentence. Now, here the father became very upset. While the girl was interrupting her father time and again, he used to get disturbed. So that is why he is telling the story. Father was highlighting that particular point that Daddy was telling the story. And again, he asked Joe, do you want to tell Daddy the story? If she wanted to tell Daddy the story, wanted to make a query, because he was very irritated to look at the action and reaction of that particular girl. And he used to get disturbed while he used to narrate the story. No, you, me. Now just look at the answer or reply of that small girl, Joe. She was replying in negative, while her father had asked if she wanted to tell Daddy the story. She replied in negative. And she again added that he must tell the story to her. I think very clear so far as this particular three words are concerned. You are very clear up to this particular point. You are able to report these words. Then lie down and be sleepy. Then father had just instructed that particular girl to be in sleepy order. Her head relapsed onto the pillow and she said, out of your head. That girl had become little bit grown up. So that is why again she was interrupting. I think very clear up to this particular point. She could never be able to rectify her action and reaction even after the instruction of her father. Very clear. There is no doubt in that. Relapsed. Dear students, note down the meaning. Relapsed, you have to look at slid back. S-L-I-D, slid. B-A-C-K, back. On to. On versus on to, I think you should be able to recognize the meaning in a very different way. So if we look at this particular preposition, on to, means movement of from one place to another. The movement of one place to another. The movement from one place to another. I think very clear up to this particular point. If we look at the case of on, it never happens. No movement is there. Very clear up to this particular point. There is no doubt in that. Let's move forward. Her head relapsed onto the pillow and she said, able to keep her head onto the pillow after the instruction of her father. Out of your head. Again, she had spoken these words. Dad, please tell the story out of your head. Here means self-made story. Again, she was instructing her father, which her father never liked. He never wanted that girl should interrupt him while he used to narrate any story. Very clear up to this particular point. She had again added these words, out of your head. It means able to tell the story by weaving the story of his own, because his father used to weave the stories by his own. Could never ever be able to consult any Panchatantra or any storybook for the stories he used to narrate her daughter, his daughter. I think very clear. Now look at the next sentence. Will, the owl thought and thought. At last he said, why don't you go see the wizard? Interrogation. Now father was just telling the story. The next episode of the story, will here means okay. The owl thought and thought. The owl was able to think deeply. Thought and thought. You have to look at repetition. And at last he said, and ultimately he was able to announce, why don't you go to see the wizard? And announced that why he didn't go to see the wizard. I think very clear up to this particular point. You are able to look at this particular episode of the story. Now again the interruption caused by that girl. Daddy, what? Just making a query by highlighting this word, daddy. Father was ever ready to reply by just asking, what? I think very clear up to this particular point. There is no doubt in that. Are magic spells real? She wanted to make a query that if magic spells were real, she wanted to make a very fine query. This was a new phase just the last month. So now she was acting and reacting in a very different way. That new phase had already started 30 months back, 30 days back, not months. Last month you are able to recognize that she had started overacting and reacting 30 days back. Very clear up to this particular point, there is no doubt in that. A reality phase. It was just a phase of reality. That habit had become permanent habit of that particular girl, because she had started making open queries. I think very clear up to this particular point in a very different order. When he told her spiders eat bugs, she turned to her mother and asked, do they really? Just look at the reality phase. Jack was able to give the knowledge of that girl that spiders eat bugs. Bugs are insects. I think very clear up to this particular point. Then she had turned to her mother and asked, do they really? She had inquired from her mother if they really, because at that moment she was just cross questioning. She was never ready to trust on what was told by her father. That phase was started because that girl had become little bit grown up. And when Claire told her God was in the sky and all around them, she turned to her father and insisted with a sly yet eager smile, is he really? Now again, she was cross questioning. Just look at, she turned to her mother and asked, do they really? And when Claire was mother of Joe. While she had told her that God was in the sky and all around them. Mother had given her the knowledge that God is omnipresent, is everywhere, in the sky and all around them. Now just look at the action and reaction of that particular girl. She turned to her father. Again, for cross questioning, she had turned to her father and insisted with a sly yet eager smile. Again, ever ready to look at the cross questioning, look at the meaning of sly, S-L-Y. It means cunningly. C-U-N-N-I-N-G-L-Y. I think very clear, yet eager smile. While the mother had told that girl that God is omnipresent, she had turned to her father and for cross questioning with cunning smile. Cunning yet eager smile. Is he really? That's the cross question. Just look at, is he really? She wanted to make a query that is God omnipresent in reality? I think very clear up to this particular point, there is no doubt in that. That was a new habit. And father was able to observe that habit. He never liked that habit, but she was not able to resist her. Joe was not able to resist. She used to act and react like that in continuity. I think very clear so far as this paragraph is concerned. Now just look at the next. They are really stories, Jack answered curtly. She had made him miss a beat in the narrative. The owl said, go through the dark woods, under the apple trees, into the swamp over the creek. Then dash, inverted commas, closed. Just look at this particular small paragraph. They are really stories. Very clear. Jack answered curtly. First of all, note down the meaning of curtly. C-U-R-T-L-Y means rudely. Father was irritated to look at the queries of that girl. So that is why he became very upset. He had just replied in a very rude manner. He had answered in a very rude manner. They are real in story. He wanted to highlight that they were real in stories. She had made him miss a beat in the narrative. He was just telling the story with 100% interest. Jack was telling Joe's story 100% interest. But while the girl had interrupted him, was not able to look at the things in a decent order. Miss a beat in the narrative. I think very clear up to this particular point. He was interrupted. Was not able to tell the story in a flow. Very clear up to this particular point. There is no doubt. Now just look at the next phase. The owl said, go through the dark woods. The owl had recommended that particular animal, that is Roger's skunk, to go through the dark woods. Very clear so far as these two words are concerned. Woods, you are able to look at the things. Forest. Dark, you are able to understand. I think while excessive forests are there. I think very clear up to this particular, while number of trees are there, while we have to look at this particular deep level of forest area. Under the apple trees, given the suggestion that under the apple trees into the swamp. Must follow this particular way under the apple trees and must be able to look at the swamp. Dear students, note down the meaning of swamp. Means muddy area, wetland, over the creek. In the guideline that he must be able to move like that, he must go through the dark woods, dark forest, under the apple trees, he follows this particular path, under the apple trees, then he must enter into the swamp area over the creek. Then dash, you have to highlight this particular point. The sign of punctuation mark you have to look at. This is a punctuation mark. You're able to recognize the difference between hyphen and dash. What's a creek? Now just look at the query of that small girl. She was again interrupting her father, saying, Dad, what's a creek? Wanted to make that particular query. Now just look at the next. A little river. Reply of father was, creek means a small river, a little river. Over the creek, and there will be the wizard's house. To highlight the things, that over the creek, there will be the wizard's house. We are able to find wizard's house over there. Over the creek, you would surely be able to get the house of wizard. Very clear. So far as suggestion of wise owl is concerned, you are very clear up to this particular point. You are very clear about this episode of the story. And that's the way Roger Skunk went. Roger Skunk followed the advice of old owl from the core of his heart, sincerely, honestly. And pretty soon, he came to a little white house. Pretty soon, just look at these two words, means very early. He had come to a little white house. He was able to just reach at a little white house. Very clear up to this particular point, and he rapped on the door. Rapped, R-A-P-P-E-D. Just note down the meaning, dear students. It means to knock. Very clear. If we look at the detailed meaning of this, it means hit hard several times. Very clear. While he had reached at the house of that particular wizard, he had knocked on the door of that particular house several times. Jack rapped on the windowsill, and under the covers, Joe's tall figure clenched in an infantile thrill. Just look at this particular sentence. Dear students, it's a little bit tough. Note it down. I'm telling you the base. Jack rapped. In a few words, I want to highlight this particular point that Jack wanted to narrate the story in a dramatic way, so that that girl should be able to take 100% interest in that. So that is why, in order to create a little bit drama, a little bit fun in the story, he rapped on the windowsill. While he was telling this particular point, that particular animal had rapped on the door, he had rapped on the windowsill of his bedroom. Very clear. In order to create drama here, he was acting and reacting in a very different way. Windowsill, I think, is very clear. Corner of the window, you are able to understand. And under the covers, Joe's tall figure clenched in an infantile thrill. Just look at. But what was the action and reaction of that girl while his father was creating drama in the story? Joe was just acting and reacting in a very different way. Under the covers, it means under the covers, top cover of her bed, while she was there on that particular bed for nap, Joe's tall figure clenched. Just look at the beauty of this. Joe's tall figure. Just highlight this particular three words are highlighting that that girl was no more a little girl. She had become tall. Just look at this word, clenched. Clenched, if we look at this particular word, it means we have to look at the things. She was acting and reacting in a very different way, in an infantile. Infant, I think you are able to look at, you must have studied this particular word in 11, while you were able to look at the poem Childhood. Infant and infantile is taken, this particular word is taken from that particular word, it means childish. The girl was acting and reacting in a very different way. Very clear. Thrill means she was getting delight. Very clear up to this particular point, there is no doubt in that. And then a tiny little old man came out with a long white beard and a pointed blue hat and said, "Hey, what's this? What do you want?" Just look at the beauty of this particular sentence. Father was telling the story in a dramatic way, so that is why he wanted to highlight the words in a very different way. Then a tiny old man came out. Tiny old man is a wizard. I think very clear up to this particular point. He was with a long white beard and a pointed blue hat. He had said, he had inquired, "Hey, what is it?" Here the words, what is, father was creating drama here. So that is why he was using the words like wizard. I think very clear. What do you want here? What you want? Your father wants to highlight the word here. What do you want? I think very clear why these words, these two sentences are given in a very different way. Because here again the father wanted to create fun. So that is why he had used the words in a dramatic order. You smell awful. The wizard's voice was one of the Jack's own favorite effects. And he did it by scrunching up his face and somehow winning through his eyes, which felt for the interval rheumy. He felt being an old man suited him. Very clear up to this particular, just listen this sentence in a very sincere way. The wizard's voice was one of the Jack's own favorite effects. Jack always liked to act and react like wizard. While he used to imitate wizard's voice in each and every story, was able to get, I think, 100% confidence. So that is why he was able to feel that particular point that wizard's voice used to just suit him. So that is why he was trying to speak like a wizard. And he did it by scrunching up his face. Now just look at the meaning of this particular word, scrunching. Scrunching means wrinkling or crumpling. Note down the meaning, dear students, note down. He did it by wrinkling up his face. He wanted to create drama, so that is why he was acting and reacting in a very different way, and he was 100% sure that voice of wizard 100% suits him. That is why he wanted to just imitate the voice, sound, and somehow winning through his eyes. Note down the meaning of this particular word, whining, making a prolonged sound. prolonged. I think very clear up to this particular point. You are able to look at the meaning of this word. Whining through his eyes, which felt for the interval rheumy. While he was telling the story, he used to feel rheumy. Rheumy here means watery. Father used to become emotional at that particular moment. So that is why till the interval of that particular story, his eyes were used to be seen with tears. Very clear up to this particular point. Rheumy is very clear, interval is very clear, scrunching is clear, whining is clear. You are able to understand the meaning of each and every word. He felt being an old man suited him. He was 100% sure that the role of old man used to suit him.